The rain didn't care that tonight could be the last night of her life. It hit the windshield in thick, angry sheets, the kind of rain that feels personal, like the sky itself is trying to warn you about something. Nancy pressed her back against the cold leather of the back seat and tried to remember how to breathe. In, out, in, out. Her fingers were shaking. Her dress, the one she bought specifically to look like she belonged, was soaked through at the hem. Her left heel had snapped clean off somewhere between the third-floor corridor and the parking garage, and she hadn't even noticed until this exact second. She had bigger problems. "How fast are they going?" she whispered. Kanji said nothing. His hands were steady on the wheel. Impossibly steady, like a man who had driven through chaos so many times that it no longer registered as dangerous, just inconvenient. The black SUV cut through a red light at 90 kilometers an hour. Seoul's neon lights smeared across the wet road like a painting someone had tried to erase. Another set of headlights appeared in the rearview mirror. Then another. 3 vehicles. All black. All keeping pace. Nancy turned to look back and immediately wished she hadn't. "Kanji." Her voice cracked. "Those cars, they're not stopping. Who are those people?" His jaw tightened. Just slightly. And then, in the most terrifyingly calm voice she had ever heard come out of a human being, he said, "My family." The words landed like a brick through glass. Nancy stared at the side of his face, at the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, at the way his eyes never once moved from the road ahead, even as the cars behind them closed in. His family. His family. She had agreed to one dinner. One dinner. A fake date. A business arrangement. She was supposed to walk in, smile, eat some overpriced food, and walk back out with enough money to fix the leak in her apartment ceiling and maybe, finally tell her landlord where he could stick his passive-aggressive maintenance notes. She was not supposed to be in a speeding car in the middle of Seoul at midnight being chased by 3 black vehicles full of men who, based on the flicker she'd just caught of someone leaning out of the passenger window, were not carrying flowers. "They're going to catch us," she breathed. "No. There are 3 of them. I know. Kanji, I am a human person who would like to continue being alive." "Nancy." Something in the way he said her name made her stop. He finally glanced at her. Just for a second. Just long enough for her to see something in his eyes that she couldn't quite name. Not fear, not guilt, but something close to both. "I'm not going to let anything happen to you." She opened her mouth. She closed it. The SUV swerved hard left. Tires screamed against wet asphalt. The cars behind them did the same. A narrow alley swallowed them whole, brick walls inches from both sides, and Nancy grabbed the door handle and the seat, and probably also her own soul, because she needed something to hold on to. And then cut to black. For hours earlier, Nancy had been complaining about her broken coffee machine. Now she was here. And the worst part? She still didn't know which version of this man she was sitting next to. The one who had saved her. Or the one who had started all of this. "Hey, welcome back, welcome back, welcome back." Before we go any further, drop in the comments right now. Where are you watching this from? I want to see every single location. Are you in Nigeria? The US? The UK? Ghana? South Africa? Kenya? Canada? Wherever you are, drop it below, because this story, it was made for you. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now before you forget, because once this story gets going, you will not want to stop. Okay, let's go all the way back to where this actually started. 3 weeks before that car chase, a man named Kanji Shin returned to Seoul from Germany. He had been gone for 14 months. He didn't tell anyone he was coming back. No announcement, no phone call, no text to the family group chat that he had muted approximately 4 years ago and never unmuted. He simply landed at Incheon Airport on a Tuesday afternoon, collected his single bag, because men like Kanji Shin did not pack more than 1 bag. They simply bought what they needed wherever they landed, stepped into a car that had been waiting without being asked, and drove back into a city that had never really felt like home. Seoul received him the way it received everyone who had been away too long. Indifferently, beautifully, with all its noise and light and organized chaos, completely unbothered by the fact that a man carrying the weight of 14 months of international operations had just walked back into its borders. Kanji was 31 years old. He had his mother's eyes and his father's silence, and absolutely nothing else from either of them that he wanted to claim. In the hierarchy of the Shin family, and make no mistake, the Shin family absolutely had a hierarchy, typed up somewhere and enforced like a legal document. Kanji was the second son, the younger one, the one who had spent his entire life in the long, suffocating shadow of his older brother Dang, who was first in everything. Firstborn, first in their father's favor, first in line to inherit an empire that had been built on things nobody talked about in polite company. Dang was the heir. Dang was respected. Dang was, by all official accounts, stable. But Kanji knew things about stability that the official accounts left out. He knew that the kind of stability that required an audience was not stability at all. It was performance. And Dang had been performing for so long that he had started to believe his own show. Kanji checked into his private residence in Gangnam. Not the family compound. Never the family compound unless absolutely necessary. And was sitting with a glass of water and absolutely zero desire to interact with another human being when his phone rang. He looked at the screen. He looked at the ceiling. He answered. "You're back," said the voice on the other end. Quiet. Precise. Slightly amused in that way that only one person in his family had ever managed to be. "Soo-yeon," he said. "Don't sound so excited. I tracked your flight. You've been back for 3 hours, and you didn't call. I needed 3 hours of peace before the chaos started." A pause. Then, softer. "It's bad here, Kanji. It's gotten worse since you left." He already knew that. He had been receiving updates from a distance, each one more concerning than the last. But hearing it in his sister's voice, Soo-yeon, who never overstated anything, who measured her words the way a scientist measured chemicals, carefully, precisely, aware that the wrong amount could cause an explosion. Hearing it from her made it real in a way that reports and secondhand information could not. "How bad?" he asked. "Father is calling a family gathering. Formal one. The kind where everyone has to show up with something to prove." Kanji set down his glass of water. "He wants everyone to bring someone." Soo-yeon continued. "A partner. Someone who demonstrates, and I am using his exact word here, loyalty. He says it's about optics. He says the family needs to look unified. It's never about optics with him. I know, but you still have to come." And Kanji, she paused again, and this time the pause was longer, heavier. "You need to bring someone. If you show up alone, Dang will use it. You know he will. Father will see it as instability. You will lose whatever ground you've managed to hold." Kanji was quiet for a long time. "I'll figure it out," he said finally. "How? You've been in Germany for over a year. You don't exactly have a warm and loving girlfriend waiting at home." I said I'll figure it out. Another pause. He could practically hear her thinking. "Come to the office tomorrow," she said. "I have an idea." He should have asked what the idea was right then and there. He should have pressed her for details, vetted the plan, approached it like the logical, measured man he prided himself on being. But he didn't. And that single moment of not asking a follow-up question, that single moment of trusting his sister's idea without knowing what it was, that changed everything. If you are enjoying the story so far, go ahead and hit that like button for me. It genuinely helps more than you know. Now let's keep going because this is where things start to get interesting. The next morning, Kanji met Soo-yeon at a mid-level corporate office building in Mapo District. The kind of building that had a decent coffee cart in the lobby and fluorescent lighting that had been threatening to flicker since 2019, but nobody had gotten around to fixing. Soo-yeon was already waiting outside when he arrived, dressed the way she always dressed, quietly, precisely, in a way that suggested she had thought about every single detail but didn't need you to notice. She was 28 years old, 4 inches shorter than her brother, and approximately 3 times sharper than everyone in their family combined. She was also watching the entrance of the building with an expression that Kanji had learned, over many years, to pay close attention to. It wasn't excitement. It wasn't mischief exactly. It was the look of someone who had already played out 17 different versions of this scenario in their head and had settled on the one with the most interesting outcome. "Okay," he said, stopping beside her. "Who are we looking for?" Soo-yeon tilted her head slightly toward the glass doors. "Her," she said simply. And that was the moment. Because Nancy Coleman walked out of that building at exactly 12:47 in the afternoon, a tote bag on one shoulder, a paper coffee cup in her other hand, mid-conversation with a colleague and laughing at something. Really laughing, the kind that reaches the eyes and doesn't ask anyone's permission, and the soul's sunlight caught the side of her face in Kanji Shin. A man who had not been caught off guard by anything or anyone in years, went completely still. But here is what Soo-yeon saw in her brother's face in that moment that she hadn't quite anticipated. It wasn't just approval. It was recognition. "You know her," Soo-yeon said slowly. Kanji didn't answer immediately. His eyes tracked Nancy across the plaza, watching the way she moved, unhurried, upright, like a woman who had made a decision somewhere along the way to stop apologizing for taking up space. "She's the one he couldn't control," Kanji continued. "The one who walked out." A silence stretched between the two of them. Then Soo-yeon said, slowly and carefully, "Kanji, if you bring her to that dinner, dang well. I know. It will not be a quiet evening. I know that too. You are trying to start something." He finally looked away from Nancy and turned to his sister. His expression was calm. Completely, utterly, unsettlingly calm. "I'm trying to finish something," he said. "Her. I want her." Soo-yeon looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked back at Nancy, who had now stopped at the coffee cart, was arguing cheerfully with the cart vendor about something, and had apparently won because the vendor was laughing and throwing in an extra something for free. Soo-yeon sighed the sigh of a woman who had spent her entire life being the only reasonable person in every room. "You," she said, "are going to make my life very complicated." But wait, here's where it gets crazy. Because at that exact moment, Nancy turned around. And for just a second, just 1 second, her eyes swept across the plaza and landed on Soo-yeon. And her entire body went rigid. She knew the sister. Of course she knew the sister. And if the sister was here, that meant... Her eyes moved to the tall man standing beside Soo-yeon, the one she hadn't clocked immediately, because her brain had been busy processing the shock of seeing that face again. And she took in the sharp jaw and the careful stillness and the scar through the left eyebrow, and she thought, "Oh no, oh absolutely not." She turned on her heel and walked back into the building. The coffee cart vendor called after her because she'd left her change. She didn't go back for it. Kanji watched her go. Something shifted in his expression that wasn't quite a smile, but was somewhere in the neighborhood. "She recognized you," Soo-yeon said. "Yes." And she walked away. "Yes. And you're smiling." "I'm not smiling." "Kanji, your face is doing a thing." He straightened his jacket. "Set up a meeting." Soo-yeon stared at him. "She just ran from us." "I know. Set up the meeting anyway. Now before we go further, I need you to understand who Nancy Coleman actually was. Because this story only works if you understand her. Not just as a woman who got caught up in something dangerous, but as a woman who had already survived something dangerous once, and had built her entire life around making sure she never had to do it again. Nancy had come to Seoul 2 years ago for a job opportunity in international trade logistics. A mouthful of a title that basically meant she was extremely good at making sure complicated things moved from one part of the world to another without falling apart. She was 28. She was from Atlanta originally. She had a laugh that could fill a room and a backbone made of something considerably stronger than bone. "I know of her," he said quietly. "She's the one who left Dang." Soo-yeon went very still. She had met Dang Shin at a work function. He had been charming in that specific, targeted way that very dangerous men are sometimes charming. Like a spotlight being turned on you, making you feel like the most interesting person in the room, while completely obscuring the fact that the spotlight belongs to them, and they can switch it off whenever they choose. She had dated him for 4 months. For months of slowly, incrementally, almost imperceptibly being told what to wear and who to spend time with, and which opinions were acceptable and which ones made her difficult. For months of a man who called it love, but practiced it like ownership. She had left on a Wednesday. She had packed while he was at a meeting, taken everything that mattered, left everything that didn't, and walked out of his life with so much composure that his housekeeper had reportedly told him she thought Nancy had just gone out to buy groceries. She had never looked back. And now, the universe, in what Nancy could only describe as a spectacular personal attack, had placed his brother's sister in her line of sight on an ordinary Tuesday lunch break. Nancy was at her desk, pretending to review a spreadsheet and actually internally screaming when her phone buzzed. She looked at the message. "Unknown number. I know you recognized us. I just want to talk." "Not him, me. 30 minutes. That's all I'm asking." "Soo-yeon." Nancy put the phone face down on the desk. She picked it back up. She put it down again. Her colleague Ji-hee leaned over from the next desk. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," Nancy said. "I've seen a family." She met Soo-yeon that evening at a cafe 3 blocks from her office. Public, well-lit, deliberately chosen. She arrived 5 minutes early and sat with her back to the wall, which she had learned from experience was simply the correct way to sit anywhere when your life had recently become complicated. Soo-yeon arrived exactly on time, alone as promised. She ordered a green tea, folded her hands on the table, and looked at Nancy the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, not unkindly, but with a thoroughness that suggested she was seeing more than the surface. He needs a date for a family dinner, Soo-yeon said, because she was not a woman who spent time on preamble. One evening. That's the whole ask. He goes to the dinner. He looks stable. He satisfies my father. And then it's done. Nancy wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. And why me? Soo-yeon was quiet for exactly one beat. Because you're convincing. That is the most diplomatic non-answer I have ever received. The ghost of something moved across Soo-yeon's face. Respect, maybe. He chose you. I can tell you he has reasons. I can also tell you that whatever those reasons are, they have nothing to do with hurting you. Your family has already hurt me. The words landed simply. No drama, no performance. Just fact. Soo-yeon absorbed them without flinching. I know that, she said quietly. And for what it's worth, what Dang did. I saw it. I didn't stop it, and I should have. That is something I carry. She paused. But Kanji is not Dang. I need you to know that. Whatever else you decide, I need you to know that. Nancy looked at her for a long time. Then she stood up, picked up her bag, and said, My answer is no. It will continue to be no. Please don't contact me again. And she walked out. She went home. She ate dinner. She watched half of a show she wasn't really watching. She went to bed. She did not sleep. Because the thing nobody tells you about walking away from someone toxic is that the walking away is the easy part. It's the aftermath that costs you. The way you start measuring every new person against the damage. The way you flinch at things that shouldn't require flinching. The way even the word family, just that word, can sit in your chest like a stone for hours. Nancy stared at her ceiling in the dark and thought about Soo-yeon's face when she'd said I should have stopped it. She thought about the fact that in 4 months with Dang, not one person in that family had said that to her. She thought, that means nothing. One honest sentence means nothing. She thought, go to sleep, Nancy. She did not go to sleep. The next evening, she was walking to her car in the parking structure beneath her office building when she heard footsteps behind her. She spun around fast, keys already in her fist, which she was not proud of because it said a lot about what her nervous system had learned to expect. It was Kanji. He stopped immediately when she spun. Both hands raised slightly, not dramatically, just enough to say I see you. I'm not a threat, stand down. They looked at each other. I parked on the wrong level, he said. You absolutely did not park on the wrong level. A pause. No, I didn't. He was taller than she remembered from the plaza. Or maybe she hadn't been close enough to properly register it before. He was wearing a dark coat, and the parking structure's overhead lights were the sickly yellow kind that made everyone look slightly unwell. And somehow he still managed to look like a man who had decided a long time ago that lighting conditions were irrelevant. 5 minutes, he said. Let me drive you home. 5 minutes of talking, and then you never have to interact with me again. You already know where I live. Yes. That's alarming. I know. 5 minutes. Nancy thought about what Soo-yeon had said. She thought about the ceiling she had stared at all night. She thought about the fact that she was a grown woman who had survived considerably worse than a car ride. And the only thing worse than having this conversation was spending another sleepless night wondering what would have happened if she had. Fine, she said. 5 minutes. And I'm timing you. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button right now. We are just getting to the good part, and you do not want to miss what happens next. The car was a dark gray Mercedes. Clean. Quiet. No excessive display of anything, which she noted because Dang's cars had always been a performance. The right brand, the right color, the loudest possible version of the statement, I have money and I need you to acknowledge it. This was just a car. A very good one, but just a car. Kanji drove the first 2 minutes without saying anything, and Nancy, who had been prepared for a pitch, for persuasion, for the kind of careful charm offensive she'd learned to identify and resist, found herself slightly thrown by the silence. Then he said, I don't want you. She blinked. Excuse me. Not in the way you're probably thinking. This isn't about attraction. It's not personal. I need someone to walk into a room with me and look like they belong there. And I need that person to be someone my family can't easily dismiss or intimidate. He kept his eyes on the road. You have a history with my family. You know how they operate. You left on your own terms. That means you can't be rattled by them the way someone new could be. That's what I need. Nancy processed this. You want me because I already survived your family once. I want you because you're the only woman my brother couldn't break. That's useful to me. The silence that followed that sentence had a texture to it. Heavy and still, like the air before thunder. Nancy turned to look out the window at Seoul sliding past them. The restaurants and the street vendors and the ordinary, beautiful chaos of a city that had no idea any of this was happening. That's a very cold way to describe a human being, she said. I know. I'm being honest because I think you'd rather have honesty than charm. She turned back to look at him. He was right, and she hated that he was right, and she was fairly certain he knew she hated it. How much? She asked. He named a number. She laughed. Not a happy laugh. The kind of laugh that comes out when something is so far off from the reality of what is being asked that laughter is the only proportionate response. You want me to walk back into that family, she said. Sit at that table, look that man in the face, and you think a number does that? Tell me what does. Nothing. Nothing does that. There is no amount of money that makes that a good idea. He nodded slowly, like he'd expected this answer and was respecting it. They pulled up outside her building. Nancy should have gotten out. She had her hand on the door handle. She was 30 seconds from being back in her apartment, back in her life, back in the carefully constructed peace she had built around herself like a fortress. But something made her pause. Maybe it was the way he hadn't argued with her, hadn't pushed, hadn't cajoled, hadn't turned up the charm in response to her resistance the way men like his brother would have. Maybe it was the ceiling she'd stared at the night before. Maybe it was the part of her that had never quite been able to stop being angry. Not at Dang specifically anymore, but at the version of herself that had shrunk for him. The version that had gotten smaller and quieter and more careful until she barely recognized herself. She turned back to Kanji. I'll do it, she said. He looked at her. Waited. Not for you. Not for your money. Not for any of this. She held his gaze. I'll do it to walk back into that room and remind him, and myself, that I am not his. That I never was. That I left, and I am still standing. She paused. One dinner. One night. And then I never want to hear the name Shin again. Something moved through Kanji's expression. Something quiet and complicated that she didn't have enough information to read yet. One dinner, he agreed. One night. She got out of the car. She walked into her building without looking back. And she told herself, firmly, that the slight unevenness in her breathing was adrenaline and nothing else. It was nothing else. Here is where it gets crazy. Because 2 days later, a transfer came through to her account. More than the number he had named. Significantly more. And there was a single message attached. For your time. Spend it however you want. I don't do arrangements. Nancy stared at her phone screen. She almost sent it back. She thought about her broken coffee machine and the ceiling leak and the passive-aggressive landlord. She transferred a portion back immediately and sent one message. I don't take more than is agreed. Don't do that again. His response came after 6 minutes. Understood. She bought a dress. Not an extravagant one. Not a look at me I am trying to impress you one. A dress that was exactly and only what she wanted to look like. Put together, confident, completely and entirely herself. She got her hair done the way she liked it, not the way she thought she was supposed to like it for a room full of people who already had opinions about her. She looked in the mirror the night before the dinner. You are doing this on your terms, she told her reflection. You walk in, you walk out, and then you go home and sleep like a person who has no regrets. Her reflection looked back at her with an expression that said, sure, girl. Let's see how that goes. The night of the dinner arrived. Kanji picked her up at 7. He got out of the car when she came down, which she hadn't expected, not in a grand gesture way, just in a quiet, considered way, like someone who had been raised to observe basic courtesies and actually followed through on them. He looked at her when she walked toward him. Just looked. No comment, no performative reaction, no sweeping her up and down with his eyes like she was something to be assessed. Ready? He asked. No, she said. But let's go anyway. The Shin family compound was in the northern hills of Seoul, the kind of address that communicated wealth without a single word, because the distance from the city and the height above it did all the talking for it. The gates were iron and the driveway was long, and the house itself was the architectural equivalent of a man who wants you to know, before you have even sat down, that he has already won. Nancy kept her face neutral. Inside the front hall, A housekeeper took their coats. Voices drifted from somewhere deeper in the house. Low, controlled, the specific frequency of a family gathering that was not, in fact, a gathering in any warm sense of the word. Soo-yeon appeared first. She looked at Nancy with something in her eyes that Nancy would have called relief if she'd allowed herself to read it. Then the dining room opened, and Kanji Shin, standing at the far end of the room with a glass of something amber in his hand, turned around. The silence was immediate and specific. The kind of silence that a room produces when everyone in it suddenly knows that the evening has just become something other than what it was announced to be. Dang smiled. It was the most dangerous smile Nancy had seen in her life, and she had seen some genuinely dangerous smiles. Well, he said softly, look who came home. Nancy felt the air in her chest solidify, but she kept her chin up, her shoulders back, and her face in the expression she had rehearsed. Not hostile, not nervous. Just present. Unmovable. From beside her, Kanji said nothing. He simply placed a hand briefly and lightly at the small of her back. Not possessive, not claiming, just a small physical signal that said I'm here, and guided her toward the table. The dinner that followed was the most elaborately disguised war Nancy had ever witnessed. Every dish that arrived was punctuated by a comment from someone. Dang's father sat at the head of the table and watched everything with the eyes of a man totaling numbers in his head. His wife, their mother, smiled at exactly the right moments and said exactly the right things and contributed absolutely nothing to Nancy's safety or comfort, which Nancy had expected and was therefore not hurt by. The passive-aggressive comments came in waves, the kind that sound like conversation but land like small blades. It's so interesting, Dang's mother said, that you came back to Seoul. Most people, after a difficult experience, they want a fresh start somewhere new. Nancy smiled back pleasantly. I did get a fresh start. I got it here. Seoul is my city too. A pause. An adjustment. Then Dang, from across the table. You look well, Nancy. Better than I remembered. Thank you, she said. I've been taking care of myself. Another pause. Longer this time. Kanji reached for his water glass. The movement was measured, unhurried. Then Dang said it. Quietly, almost conversationally, like it was an observation rather than a weapon. You always liked what was mine. The table went still. Nancy felt her jaw tighten. She felt the familiar sensation of wanting to shrink, to smooth things over, to make the tension go away by making herself smaller. She did not do that, but she didn't have to respond. Because Kanji set down his glass and looked at his brother with an expression that was completely flat and absolutely arctic and said, in a voice that was quieter than the room, you never deserved what you had. And there it was. Here is where it gets crazy. Because what happened next was not a slow escalation. It was not a gradual build. Dang put his glass down on the table with a sound that was just slightly too sharp to be called placing it down, and stood up, and the entire room seemed to lean back involuntarily, and words came out of him that stopped being about dinner, that stopped being about Nancy, that became something much older and much rawer, about years of being told he was the heir and the chosen one, while simultaneously being told he was not enough, about a brother he had always read as a rival rather than a sibling, about power that he'd been promised, and people who had the audacity to exist outside of his grip. Kanji stood too, and the thing that Nancy registered in that moment, the thing that she could not have predicted and could not dismiss, was that when Dang stepped around the table toward her, it was Kanji who stepped between them. Without drama, without a speech, just between them. A body that said no before a word needed to be said. Their father stood. Their mother's hand went to her mouth. Soo-yeon sat completely still and watched everything with the eyes of someone collecting information. The fight did not end cleanly. Fights between brothers with that much history never do. There was shouting. There was a specific, brutal honesty that comes out when men who have been performing stability for too long finally crack the performance. There was a moment where Dang looked at Nancy and said something about her that Nancy would not repeat to another living soul. And there was a moment immediately after where Kanji said, in a voice she had never heard from him before, not raised, just stripped of everything polite, say that again and we are done. All of it. Every arrangement, every agreement, every tie. Done. Dang did not say it again, but he smiled. That same dangerous smile. And he sat down, and he picked up his glass. And he said, very softly, to no one in particular, fine. Fine is never fine. Every woman in that room knew that. Fine from a man like Dang was a door being closed so that a window could be opened somewhere else, somewhere you weren't watching. But nobody said that. The dinner ended. Coats were retrieved. Cars were brought around. In the back of the car driving away, Nancy sat with her hands in her lap and looked straight ahead and did not speak for 2 full minutes. Then she said, "He's going to do something." Kanji was quiet. "You know he is," she said. "Yes. And you're not worried." He glanced at her. "I didn't say that." Another silence. "Why did you really choose me?" she asked. Not the version of the question she'd asked before, not the tactical one, not the useful to me version. The real one. The underneath one. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he said, "Because you didn't stay." She turned to look at him. Most people in that family, everyone who gets close to it, they stay. They bend. They adjust. They tell themselves it's temporary until the temporary becomes permanent. You didn't do that. He kept his eyes on the road. You just left. Like it was simple. A pause. It wasn't simple. I know that. But you made it look like it was. And I needed to be reminded that leaving was possible. Nancy looked at his profile for a long time. The city moved past them outside the windows. Beautiful and indifferent as always. "It wasn't simple," she said quietly. "I know. It cost me. I know that too." They arrived at her building. He stopped the car. He did not get out this time. And she understood somehow that this was also a consideration. Giving her the easy, uncomplicated exit, not making the goodbye into something that required management. She reached for the door handle. "Nancy." She paused. "Thank you," he said. "For tonight. For not being smaller than you are." She got out of the car. She went upstairs. She sat on her sofa in the dark for a while, still in her dress, and she thought about a man she had spent 4 months shrinking for and a man she had spent one evening standing next to. And she thought about the difference between those two things, and she told herself it meant nothing. She was almost convinced. If you are enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button and share this video. I put everything into these stories, and your support means everything to me. She went to bed. She woke up at 3:47 in the morning to the sound of her phone. It was a text from a number she didn't recognize. 6 words. "Don't go to work tomorrow. Please." She sat up, stared at the screen, typed back. "Who is this?" 3 dots. Then, Soo-yeon. "New phone. Please listen. Something is happening." Nancy was already out of bed, but it was too late, because at that exact second, her buzzer went. The building's front entrance buzzer, at 3:47 in the morning, long and insistent. Nancy stood in the middle of her apartment, phone in hand, heart suddenly very loud. She did not press the intercom. She went to her window instead and looked down at the street. 2 black cars were parked outside her building. Men stood beside them, not smoking, not checking their phones, not doing any of the things ordinary people standing outside a building at 4 a.m. would do. Just standing, just waiting. Her phone buzzed again. This time a call. Kanji's name. She had saved his contact without fully acknowledging the moment she'd done it. She answered. "Don't open the door," he said. "I can see the cars," she said. "I know. I'm 2 minutes away. Don't open the door. Don't go to the lobby. Go to your back stairwell and wait." Kanji. 2 minutes, Nancy. I promise. She grabbed her bag, her keys, shoved her feet into the nearest shoes, and went. The back stairwell of her building smelled like old paint and cleaning products, and tonight it smelled like every bad decision she had ever made leading up to this specific moment. She went down fast, her one sensible shoe and the broken-heeled dress shoe creating an uneven rhythm on the concrete stairs, and she had made it to the second-floor landing when she heard the front door of the building open somewhere below her. She stopped, pressed herself against the wall. Footsteps. 2 sets. Coming up. Then, the fire exit at the bottom of the stairwell swung open. And Kanji was there, looking up at her, one hand holding the door, the expression on his face carrying precisely 0 panic, but a very significant amount of urgency. "Move," he said quietly. She moved. They were in the car in 40 seconds. The SUV pulled away from the building before her door was fully closed. And through the rear window, she watched 2 men emerge from the front entrance of her building and stand on the pavement looking after them. And then the black cars that had been parked outside started their engines. And that is how we got here. That is how we got to the rain and the neon and the 3 vehicles and the wrong level parking structure and the words that she still couldn't fully process even as Seoul blurred past the windows. My family. His family, who had sent men to her building at 4 in the morning. Where are you taking me? She asked. Somewhere safe. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. He made a turn that pressed her sideways. I have a property. Off the grid. No connection to the family name. And the car's behind us. Working on it. Working on it, she repeated. Great. Super comforting. Wonderful. The next 12 minutes were the longest 12 minutes of Nancy Coleman's entire life. 3 turns, 2 alleys, a stretch of elevated expressway where for approximately 4 seconds she thought they had lost the chase, and then they hadn't, and then they had, and then silence. The rearview mirror empty. The road behind them dark and rain-soaked and blessedly, beautifully clear. They drove for another 20 minutes in a direction she couldn't entirely track before the city thinned out, and they turned through a gate she wouldn't have noticed if she hadn't been looking directly at it, onto a private road that wound through trees until it delivered them to a house that was not large and was not showy and was precisely the kind of place a person chose when they needed to not be found. Kanji turned off the engine. They sat in the silence of a car that had just stopped moving after running, and the silence had a specific weight to it, the kind of weight that comes after adrenaline, when your body is trying to recalibrate what counts as normal. Nancy looked at her broken heel. I like these shoes, she said. And somehow, in the way that absurdity sometimes breaks through the unbearable, that made Kanji exhale through his nose in something that was almost a laugh. They went inside. The house was warm, spare, thoughtfully stocked with things that suggested someone had used it as a place to think. Books, good lighting, a kitchen with actual food in it, no decorative items that existed purely to impress. Kanji checked every room, every window. Then he came back to the main room where Nancy was sitting on the sofa with her shoes off, and both her arms wrapped around herself, and her composure held together with what she could only describe as the last available threads. He sat across from her, not beside her, giving her space. He did this, she said. Dang. Yes. Because of tonight. Because of me. Because I didn't play my role the way he expected. You were the most available target. His jaw tightened. I should have moved faster. I knew he'd react. I just thought. He stopped. You thought you had more time. Yes. A long silence. You could have left me there, Nancy said. Called me, warned me, and let me handle it. It would have been easier for you. It would have been easier, he agreed. So why didn't you? He looked at her steadily. Because I don't leave things unfinished, he said. Something about the way he said it. Not as a declaration, not performed, just stated quietly like it was simply the truth of who he was, settled into the room like something permanent. Nancy looked at him for a moment. Then she looked away. I need to sleep, she said. Room at the end of the hall. Lock works. I'll be out here. She nodded, stood, walked toward the hall. At the doorway, she paused with her back to him. Kanji. Yes. I'm going to need to go to work in the morning. I have a meeting I can't miss. A pause. Okay. She turned slightly. Okay. I'll drive you. We'll assess the situation in the morning. He met her eyes. I trust you to know when something matters. She nodded once. She went to the room. She locked the door. She lay on her back in the dark with her heart still going faster than she would have liked and her mind moving through everything that had happened in. She checked her phone. The last 18 hours. And she thought about a man sitting in the next room who had driven through a car chase for her and put himself between her and his brother and said I don't leave things unfinished like it was just a fact about the sky. She told herself it meant nothing. She was significantly less convinced than she had been the night before. She fell asleep. In the morning, they drove back into Seoul. The city was already fully alive. The morning commute, the street vendors, the coffee carts and the noise and the indifferent beautiful chaos. Nancy watched it from the passenger seat and felt the strange doubling sensation of last night and this morning existing in the same timeline. Kanji pulled up outside her office building. I'll be here at 6, he said. You don't have to. I'll be here at 6. She got out of the car. She looked back once through the window, met his eyes briefly, then turned and walked into the building and into her life. She had been at her desk for 2 hours when Kanji's phone, on the other side of the city, rang. She didn't know about the call. She didn't know that on the other end of the line, someone told him in 3 sentences that his father had died that morning. She didn't know that in the same hour, in the family compound in the Northern Hills, Dang Shin had already begun making phone calls of his own. Fast, deliberate phone calls to people who held debts and loyalties and who would, without hesitation or complication, do exactly what he asked them to do. She didn't know that the power of an entire empire had just shifted in the space of a morning, and that the man she had started, despite every effort not to trust, was now standing in the middle of that shift, exposed in a way he had never been before. She didn't know any of this. She was reviewing a shipping manifest when it happened. The call that came to Kanji that afternoon wasn't from his father's people or his family's lawyers. It was from the driver of his own security detail, gasping, saying words that didn't entirely form a coherent sentence except for one phrase that came through with terrible clarity. He barely made it out. He woke up in a room he didn't immediately recognize. The light was wrong. The ceiling was unfamiliar. His ribs felt like they had filed a formal complaint. He turned his head, and there was Soo-yeon, sitting in a chair 3 feet away, watching him with that same precise, careful expression. Alive. Whole. In a place nobody was supposed to know about. Kanji stared at her. "You're supposed to be dead," he said. She looked at him for one moment. "Focus," she said. He sat up, ignoring the protest from at least 2 separate parts of his body. "Soo-yeon, listen to me." Her voice was steady, but underneath the steadiness something was cracking. Just slightly. Just enough for him to hear it if he knew how to listen, and he did. He always did. While you were trying to survive, while you were handling the ambush and the power shift and all of it. She stopped. She looked at him with eyes that carried the specific weight of someone delivering news they wish they didn't have. "They took her," she said. The room went very quiet. Kanji looked at his sister, and the calm that had been the defining feature of his face for as long as anyone had known him, that unreadable, unmovable, careful calm, was gone. And in its place was something that was not panic and was not grief and was not rage exactly, but was made of all 3 of them, and was considerably more dangerous than any one of them alone. "Tell me everything," he said, "and thank you for watching. If you made it this far, drop a comment right now. Tell me what you think happens next. Tell me what you felt during that dinner scene. Tell me which moment hit you the hardest. Your comments keep this channel going, and I read every single one. If you haven't subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? Hit that button, turn on notifications, and come back for the next part of this story because we are nowhere near done. Kanji is coming for her. Dang has made the worst mistake of his life, and Soo-yeon knows things that are going to change everything. This story is just getting started.